Hi, I'm going to cover a few points of law in this video, and to start with I'm sharing this tweet here from Georgie Revolt 50 Climate Crisis, and he's written here: the most powerful man in the country is seriously considering breaking the law in order to force a situation whereby 65 million people will within days be short of food, meds, fuel, businesses will collapse overnight, and a hard bordering Ireland will reignite war. What the F, UK 2019. And a few years ago that might have seemed like something out of a Hollywood movie sketch. But this is Britain, this is where we are at. And you know, we have to accept the facts that the Yellowhammer report, well, plan, perhaps we should call it, is the base scenario. That is what we are going to face, what's in Yellowhammer. The worst case scenario is in Black Swan, which has not yet been published. But we know that it exists, and that's the worst case scenario. We are talking about roundup of people, you know, martial law, rationing. This is a coup. This is a far-right fascist coup. Now, the same thing's been going on in America, and we know it's the same global corporate powers happening here now. They want to. What they're doing is they're silencing the voice of sense and sanity and human compassion because they want their new world order. And it's a Netanyahu new world order. I mean, basically, Netanyahu's in every nation, all looking out for their own interests and occasionally warring with each other too, if you know, they start to want to stretch the boots a bit. Because that's the nature of this beast. And they are stamping out the progression, the social progressions that have been made since World War II, especially in Europe. And in that sense, Europe is ahead of America, because since 1949, the people of Europe have collectively agreed to live under and devised a system of socio-capitalism, not corporate capitalism, not Soviet communism, socio-capitalism. Capitalism isn't abolished, religion isn't abolished. Equality among all peoples is the basic motto. Human rights, protecting the environment, living like responsible, caring, intelligent beings on this planet. That's what Europe is all about. That's what the people of Europe generally are all about. But, unfortunately, this doesn't sit well with the likes of Netanyahu and various other fascist powers that seek to take control of our planet, and they've got their own hideous agendas, and they are hideous because they're hideous people. And humanity does need to understand that without compassion, humanity is a beast. Compassion is the cornerstone of intelligence. And unfortunately, it's been squeezed out of the political world to the extent where, you know, lives can be thrown to the wind according to economy. When economy is there to serve humanity, humanity isn't there to serve an economy. What is the point of an economy that humanity is serving rather than the economy serving us? And ultimately, any economy serving humanity, true humanity, will also serve the planet, because it is in our best interest to look after the planet that we are living on. And this is the whole reason why these corporations want to shut us up, and they want to shut Europe up. They want to destroy Europe. I've just been listening to Nigel Farage on mainstream TV news talking about how he doesn't just want to get Britain out of the EU, he wants every country in Europe out of the EU. Pardon? This is an attack. Now, just because at the moment they're not using guns, you know, bombs and bullets, well, certainly there are going to be bullets on the street of Britain under martial law. And then there's all the risks associated with having our police working with the military, which is exactly what this government have stated they will do, having the police working with the military in order to keep the peace while people are queuing up to get their rations. For fuel, food, medicines, who knows? And then all the abuses of power that come with men with guns on our streets. And especially the kind of men who are serving the kind of neo-fascist interests of men like Nigel Farage and our own present alleged Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his sidekick, or some say his boss, Dominic Cummings, who really, where did this guy get dragged out from? Under a stone? Now, I'm just going to play you this, because what's happened in America here is a stunt has been pulled, that while the equivalent of their MPs, Congress, were at a meeting, you know, to commemorate 9/11, they've rushed stuff through the House to get it passed, which includes ending Medicare, you know, denying Medicare to millions of people. So listen to this lady's reaction to that here.
I will not yield. We're not going to let anybody touch you. I will not yield, Mr. Speaker. I will not yield. There is no. You shall not usurp the process, Mr. Speaker. How dare you subject this body to trickery, deceptive practices, hijacking the process? We have been here day and night for months defending what we believe, and you would submit this body to trickery, deception, deceit. It is so typical of the way you conduct yourselves. How dare you, Mr. Speaker?
It is not leadership.
How dare you do this, Mr. Speaker?
Hijacking of democracy.
If this is the way you believe democracy works, shame on you. This is not appropriate, and you know it. The people of North Carolina, you will answer to the people of North Carolina.
Please don't think that you're going to continue.
You will answer to the people of North Carolina.
Not today.
Like this.
Not today.
If you usurp this process in this fashion, you will answer to the people of North Carolina. We have had cancer treatments. We have had people who have driven after surgery to defend their constituents. And you wait until a moment when you have suggested there will be no votes. When we're in the midst of a redistricting process, the partisanness is rampant. How dare you, Mr. Speaker? How dare you, Mr. Speaker? How dare you usurp this process? The unseemly lack of leadership is incredible. Absolutely cowardice, childishness, cowardice. How dare you do this, Mr. Speaker?
So I'll leave you the link to that under here. It's from Brian Tyler Cohen, who really does excellent videos and coverage and commentary on the political goings-on of the United States, which it appears are being mirrored in Britain. And that's why I've shown this, to show this is a global phenomenon now, and it is being orchestrated and manipulated and controlled by the corporate media, and it's all in the interest of corporate interests. They have this plan They believe that humanity needs to be called. You see, they have this strange idea that apparently God asked us to go forth and multiply so that we could produce these corporations who would then kill billions of us in this huge, great big bloodbath. And then they're going to build their little utopia on what's left of planet Earth by the time they've finished. Of course, they will not succeed, because the only thing they will have done is guaranteed their own extinction. Because they're stupid, and we cannot allow them. We cannot allow this stupidity to govern us. That is not the point of a leadership. A leadership is not there to be stupid. But unfortunately, that is where we are at. And the whole reason why we're being governed by this stupidity is because of the divisions that they foster and create within society by the policies and that they've implemented in the years since World War II, and all of them aimed either covertly or overtly at slowly destroying all the social progressions that we have made as a species in terms of establishing human rights, the additions to the Constitution, including civil rights and all of these things. Apparently the only thing that's allowed to progress in this world is the technology. Everything else, us as human beings, apparently we aren't allowed to progress, even though it's with those progressions that the technology has been developed in the first place. But they want to take the technology and they want to throw the human away. This is a crime. We're talking about a crime. It's theft. It's theft to steal our progress and force humanity to go back to a feudal age, because that is what we are returning to here. A feudal system with the corporations as the global aristocracy. And they will impose corporate communism on us. They who are calling our socio-capitalism, they're calling it communism, when actually that is what they want to force on every nation. Corporate communism and socialism for the 1% and their circles of cronies. So now I'm just going to go through a few links here, because we have this ruling recently in Britain from the Scottish judges that have ruled Parliament suspension is unlawful. And what did the Scottish judges say? Well, Mr Johnson had previously insisted it was normal practice for a new government to prorogue Parliament, and that it was nonsense to suggest he was attempting to undermine a democracy. But the Court of Session judges, which is the equivalent of Scotland's Supreme Court, were unanimous in finding that Mr Johnson was motivated by the improper purpose of stymieing Parliament, and he had effectively misled the Queen in advising her to suspend Parliament. They added, the court will accordingly make an order declaring that the Prime Minister's advice to Her Majesty the Queen and the prorogation which followed thereon was unlawful and is thus null and of no effect. I mean, that is a very serious judgment. Now, recently, I'm just going to have a look through here to see if I can find the links, because there's that many of them. Recently, it's been exposed that Boris Johnson secretly asked for a massive amount of user data to be tracked, and this is people's private information, people's data on the internet, people who've used the gov.uk portal. I mean, this is very serious, because what we've got is a hostile government that has closed the doors to democracy, closed the doors of Parliament to democracy, and they have plans for martial law, because they definitely want their hard Brexit, because otherwise men like him are probably going to end up bankrupt, if not in jail, for all the crimes and the fraudulent businesses and the tax evasions that they've been up to over the years. So we're in an us or them situation, you see. As far as they're concerned, we're them. And as far as we're concerned, they are them. But as far as they're concerned, it's them, isn't it? Or we the people. So throw us off the edge of a cliff, please, because they don't want to face the music, do they? They don't want to face justice. They do not want to have to fork out the money that they owe. Because people need to understand that the reason why Europe has devised these tax laws and these strict regulations now around corporations and tax havens and what have you, is because left to their own devices, every single country in this world, especially in the EU, will end up like Greece. Because they're taking out of the system, taking out of the European markets, and they're not investing anything back in. They're not putting anything back in. They're taking more and more out, giving less and less, and all the money is going where? In their tax havens. It can't go on. It's non-sustainable. It is unsustainable. We're dealing with criminals. We need to understand this. This isn't about who voted Brexit, who voted to stay. This is about waking up to reality now, because let's face it, that referendum in 2016, I knew it at the time. Many people did know it. People that are aware of what's going on in this world. Okay? We knew right from the start what was going on. But the majority of people trusting in the BBC were misled, were led astray. People thought the BBC was actually pro-EU, when actually, no, they weren't. They play their games, playing devil's advocate, covert fascists is what the BBC are, because they have stood by this government every step of the way, the mainstream media and the BBC. Now, I shared this on my Facebook. It's from my Twitter feed, from somebody called Maureen Fitzsimmons. And she says, I gave a guy a lift tonight. He hadn't eaten for 3 days. The local food bank had turned him away because they don't have enough food over school holidays. So he'll starve. He's 70 years old. Conservatives, Lib Dems, you did this, and I fucking despise you for it. Now, my friend Yvonne here, she lives in New Zealand. She cannot believe that people in Britain are dependent on food banks, and that food banks have come to replace social security benefits. I mean, this is outrageous. When I explained to her that even nurses are actually now dependent on these food banks, working people, because the wages just don't pay enough, are dependent on these food banks. And I tell you, after Brexit, we'll all be dependent on a food bank, because there'll be nothing in the shops. So now it transpires that, I'm just going to flick through some of these. The Islands Court has, I mean this, they're going to hike council tax to fund crippled social care, as if people aren't paying enough council tax already. I tell you, these people, they are crazy. They are crazy. So, and yeah, I think Jeremy Corbyn, he is our only hope. Really, I mean, the guy, he's got the experience, he's got the expertise, he's got the leadership qualities that Britain needs right now. People were saying, oh, he should be replaced by, what's his name, McDonnell. But really, no. We know Jeremy Corbyn now. We know what we're getting. I think we are going to have to go for sense and sanity. All this stuff about always Stalin and communism, I'm sorry, go away. This is just absolute xenophobic madness. Xenophobia should have no place in politics. And as I've stated before, all these newspapers that have been publishing stories comparing Jeremy Corbyn to Stalin, you really do need to be sued for defamation, because that is absolutely ridiculous, and there is absolutely no comparison between Stalin and what Jeremy Corbyn is trying to do. In fact, I would say that there's a greater comparison here between Stalin and the Conservatives and Lib Dems, because it was the Lib Dem and Conservative coalition government that started this kind of stuff off, that people of 70 years old are without food. Okay, so, you know, anybody who's bought on that narrative, sold on that narrative, I'm sorry, you are believing in fairy tales, is all I can say. You believe in fear-mongering. You're a victim of fraud, because it is a fraud that the press have been participating in their relentless attack on Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, they were saying he's comparable to Stalin. I were calling him Mr. Wishy-Washy. Okay, now he's stood up and shown his backbone, and he's really come out on top as far as I'm concerned. I'm like, yay, well done, Jeremy Corbyn. Yes, you'll get my vote. Okay. So, then we've got this, which is from Paul Mason. On Saturday, for the first time in living memory, neo-fascists were chanting the name of the serving Prime Minister. Supporters of the English Defence League and the Democratic Football Lads Alliance wandered around Whitehall, some drunk, harassing random Remain protesters and shouting in the faces of journalists, until inevitably they attacked the police. It's part of an unnerving trend that's emerged in the past 2 weeks, the normalisation of chaos. You know, and about how the normality, the BBC's normality, makes it all seem like, yeah, you know, it's all just part of a day's business. No, it isn't. People, this is a very serious situation. We are literally talking about civil war. Is happening right now above our heads. Okay? Right now it is happening above our heads. Between Parliament and government, there's a standoff. So the EU has now stated that, look, he's renegaded on the Good Friday Agreement. And this is another hidden agenda behind Brexit, is ending the Good Friday Agreement, which is exactly what Brexit does, the hard Brexit that Boris Johnson wants. And I here state that I find it very, very suspicious. And perhaps it is a testament to just how accurately, how much control they have, these criminal Tories, to rig an election so finely as to get a coalition government that invites Ulster Union loyalists into Parliament in Britain just at a time that we're about to have this referendum that effectively had the potential, and now will, if Boris gets his way, scrap the Good Friday Agreement. That is very suspicious. That is very, very suspicious, especially when we recall the van containing 200,000 blank ballot papers that went missing during the general election that elected Miss May into Downing Street with her coalition government of the DUP, to all intents and purposes, Ulster Unionists, ultra-loyalists. Now, recently, the I think it's the Irish church, the Irish courts have come out and stated that Boris didn't break the law by the proroguing Parliament. Okay. Which really, what do we expect? What would we expect them to say, considering that, you know, we're talking about loyalists, they're part of this government, the Northern Irish DUP are part of this government now, they're behind Boris Johnson. It's like, yeah, sorry, no. Northern Irish Court dismisses case against no deal Brexit and claims that a no deal Brexit and the imposition of a hard border wouldn't damage the Northern Ireland peace processes. This is the High Court in Belfast, which is basically in the back pocket of Boris Johnson and co. Okay, so I'm sorry, High Court in Belfast, I do not take your judgment seriously. I think all the evidence, in order to make this judgment, you have proved yourself, High Court Belfast, totally inept, actually ignorant, and actually criminally negligent, because you've refused all the evidence that tells us without a shadow of a doubt that a hard border will damage the Northern Ireland peace process, and it effectively scraps the Good Friday Agreement. So, High Court in Belfast, go away, shut your mouths, you're a set of corrupt bastards, is what I have to say to you. So now this brings us back to more crimes being committed as far as these no-deal Brexit ads. And this is Jo Swinson, I think, of the Lib Dems. I mean, she's absolutely spot on right here. I don't really I can't say I'm that much impressed with anybody, really, who feels very strongly that there ought to be a monument set up for Margaret Thatcher. But nonetheless, she is right here. These get ready for Brexit are actually, it is public money being spent on advertisements for rich people, rich corporations that want to avoid paying taxes, that want to keep their tax havens, that want to stay out of jail. Okay, because I tell you, they are all up to their necks in it. I'll leave you Gordon Bowden's link again. I've left it on my other videos. I'll leave it on this if you want to see the kind of goings on within the financial world, the levels of crime. People couldn't even imagine it. Imagine the amount of crime that these people have been committing. So this is more far-right extremism going on in the world. In America, where, you know, we are going to be beholden to America. Apparently, we don't like EU's health and safety regulations. We don't like their environmental protection laws. We don't like human rights. We don't like workers' rights. We don't like the thought of rich people paying taxes. We love their tax havens because, you know, they help us so much. Our lives in Britain have improved so much because that is an improvement to those bastards of power to see 70-year-old 70-year-old British citizens having to beg for food and even be turned away back from a food bank. Okay, so here we have Lord Sumption here, and you know, he's got a lot to say. I'm going to leave you these links. Please check through them. Please check through them. We are in a constitutional crisis. The government is using prerogative powers without a majority in the Commons. Ministers can't use such powers without a majority. It's a serious situation. This is a serious situation, people. The fact is that our entire system depends on ministers being responsible to Parliament and not directly to the people. If ministers exercise Crown powers without being responsible to Parliament, they are effectively responsible to nobody. And that is where we're at, and that's why this is a coup. Because that's the way our democracy works, is that people elect their MPs, and then their MPs represent us, our views, our thoughts, our needs in Parliament. That's where democracy takes place, in Parliament. And all these people saying, well, you know, you're destroying democracy. These Brexiteers, hardline Brexiteers. Sorry, no, a referendum is not legally binding. It's not the same as an electoral vote. It's not legally binding, and it is up to Parliament to be responsible in actually responding to the referendum. And the referendum was not about crashing out of the EU with no deal, because that is what happens to criminal countries that get expelled from the EU, you see. That's what happens on expulsion. Nobody expels themselves. Nobody decides to put themselves in prison, do they? Like a criminal, when actually they've not committed any crime. That isn't a sane choice, is it? To expel yourself from the only viable market, really, that's providing everything you need, has trade deals with 161 countries. I mean, how long do British people, do you really believe that we're going to get a trade deal with America in 6 months? I'm sorry, no, you're not going to get one. Congress will block it over the hard border in Ireland. They've already vowed to block it. You're looking at, on average, it takes 2 years to get one trade deal. So we've got 161 trade deals to replace. I think you're going to be living on your rations for a very, very long time. And we can't forget that post-World War II, British people were living on rations right up until the late 50s. And people seem to forget this, you see, because we've got a generation now that I've never known anything like what their grandparents had to suffer. And as is stated here, this political crisis now goes far beyond Brexit. Our very democracy is at stake. And here we have Mr. Grieve explaining, you know, I mean, it is outrageous. It is outrageous what has happened, because the people, you see, yes, you've got your hardcore Brexiteers who want to leave the EU, who aren't researched, who don't really understand it. All they understand is their hatred for foreigners, their hatred for Muslims. You know, they've got some strange idea of what British culture is all about. They seem to forget that it was British lawyers that devised the human rights that are now the foundation of EU law. They seem to forget that it was 2 British lawyers that wrote those human rights and got them ratified through the EU. And that a lot of the laws and regulations that are in the EU are a direct result of Britain's involvement in that. You know, we haven't been some alienated being while the EU just operates around us and creates its own laws and we have no say in them. We have had a very big say and a very big influence in the laws that govern the EU. And they're not draconian laws. They're not the kind of laws, actually, that leave 70-year-old people starving. And the very fact that this has happened in Britain is because Britain has refused, point blank refused, to accept EU law. And that's why there's been this battle. I mean, David Cameron even refused 22 million euros a year to stock Britain's food banks. He refused it. The EU offered it. David Cameron refused it. Now, what's happened to Maduro? over refusing aid from America, America that's persecuting them, that's sanctioning them. You know, America sanctions them and then offers them charity. And of course Maduro's refused it. But David Cameron is even, he is worse than what people have stated that President Maduro is of Venezuela. He is worse than him because he has refused money that was the British citizens' legal right as EU citizens to receive aid from the EU in a time of austerity when people are queuing up at food banks and this government's cut all public spending, leaving people destitute, 70-year-old people with no food, and the EU offers 22 million euros a year to David Cameron to stock the food banks. No, says David Cameron. Now, why was that? Is it because he didn't want people to see anything good at all coming from the EU? Would it have gone against his future plans? Yes, of course, because that is what they do. So here we have the Huff Post here, and John Bercow. I mean, he said he's going to resign. It's like, I was just like, please don't resign, John Bercow. We need you. But you know, he delivered a speech, annual lecture at Birmingham Centre for the Rule of Law recently, and he said that suggestions that Johnson could defy the law were frankly astonishing. Moreover, he used a comparison that was very pointed indeed, claiming it would be like justifying robbing a bank on the basis that the cash stolen would be donated to a charitable cause immediately afterwards. That very much felt like a jibe at Johnson's own infamous remarks about Muslim women in burqas looking like bank robbers. Bercow then doubled down in one typically verbose section. He ad-libbed from his script to actually compare Johnson to a knife-wielding street gang member. Yeah, and that's exactly what he is. That is exactly how we need to see him. He is a knife-wielding street gang member. They've been running a racket. That is what they've been doing. They have been running a racket, stealing money, asset stripping British, independently owned British businesses, asset stripping pension funds, asset stripping everybody that they can. Even our NHS, even our benefit system. They've been creating fake companies that do not exist. And so, of course, they're terrified. All the evidence is here from Gordon Bowden, okay? All the evidence, he shows it all their fake AAA rated corporations, companies that are doing nothing and actually even receiving subsidies for doing nothing off this government and not paying any taxes. But they are good money laundering fronts, you know, for the sale of things like illegal nuclear weapons that David Cameron's been involved in. I tell you, this rabbit hole goes very, very, very deep. And actually, we don't need to go that deep. We can drop them right in their own hole and tell them to dig their way out of it. Which is exactly what they hope to do to us, to the innocent, hard-working people of Britain, many of whom, you know, they view me as an enemy because I don't want them to lose all the food and all the rights and live under martial law, because they've got no comprehension of it. They actually believe that all of that is fear-mongering. All of that is fear-mongering. So now I have got something to say to the Supreme Court now, because on Tuesday the Supreme Court is going to hear the case and they may decide to ignore the Scottish Court's, the Scottish Supreme Court's judgment, and found instead in favour of Boris Johnson, as the Belfast High Court has found quite corruptly, because they have ignored evidence in order to be able to arrive at that judgment. And the evidence, as I have presented, is all in here, and it's for all to know. So, sorry, Belfast High Court, you have been found negligent. And it is criminal negligence, because you're ignoring evidence related to risks of a terrorist threat against the people of Northern Ireland. And so it's a very serious miscarriage of justice there, according to the judgment that the Belfast High Court has made. But this is the warning now to the Supreme Court, because if the Supreme Court should fail to uphold the learned judgment of the Scottish Court of Sessions, their Supreme Court, then that's it. I'm afraid you have opened the doors. You leave the British people with no choice but for civil disobedience as part of a lawful revolution. And I refer here to the Security Services Act 1989. And it is very, very important, because, you know, the function of it is to safeguard the economic well-being of the United Kingdom against threats posed by the actions or intentions of persons outside the British Islands. Well, we know that there's Bannon, there's Trump, there's Pence, there's Netanyahu came over immediately to visit Boris, all who have vested interests in Britain coming out of the EU. So we are talking about a cabal here. We're talking about a conspiracy to put British lives in danger. This is how serious it is. And to the extent that somehow they've managed to get into Parliament, you know, get into number 10 and shut down Parliament, shut down our democracy. And even to the extent of controlling the High Court of London, that decided that Boris Johnson can tell as many lies as he pleases and not be prosecuted. This is a very serious situation. So if the Supreme Court now fails to uphold the law and the rule of democracy and the Constitution, the unwritten Constitution of Parliament, then you are calling for revolt, and it will be beholden on and the duty of every civil servant to rebel, to cease from obeying their so-called masters, because the government itself is a criminal and actually in cahoots with foreign entities who have vested interests in harming the welfare of the British people, in attacking the EU, and also even totally destroying the very unity of our United Kingdom. And, you know, I'll leave you the link to it, but basically it's about prevention and detection. So as far as it relates to serious crime, shall apply for the purposes of this Act as it applies for the purposes of safeguarding our kingdom. The function of the service shall be the protection of national security, and in particular its protection against threats from espionage, terrorism and sabotage, from the activities of agents of foreign powers, and from actions intended to overthrow or undermine parliamentary democracy by political, industrial or violent means. Well, that is exactly what they are doing. And we know they are working with foreign powers. I'm sorry, America is a foreign power. Israel is a foreign power. And they are working with Boris Johnson. This is a threat to our national security, and they are threatening martial law. Now, what kind of government needs martial law to enforce a policy like a hard Brexit that apparently the public have voted for, because they know damn well that the public did not vote for that, and the public were reassured time and time again by British Tory MPs that, and Leave campaigners that, oh no, of course we're not going to just crash out of the EU. Of course food supplies and medicines aren't going to be disrupted. Of course there's going to be no hard border across Ireland. Reassurance, people vote for it thinking, oh well, you know, it might stop them immigrants coming in, the ones that have been infected by Nigel Farage's xenophobia, or it might stop those Muslims coming in, or the EU army. Nobody's talking about DynCorp, the corporate military outfit that's squatting right now in Britain and can bring in as many soldiers as they like from abroad. You see, we need to be absolutely clear. This is about a takeover, and it is about literally erasing everything that our forebears fought to, who survived and struggled through 2 world wars. And vowed never again shall they return to those feudal conditions, stripped of their human rights, people living in squalor, people having to watch their children die because they can't afford the medicine. Exactly what is happening in America right now. This is totally serious. So I say that on Tuesday, if the Supreme Court of Britain fails now to uphold the law, to stand by democracy, to abide by the Security Services Act of 1989, then that is it. There is no law in Britain. The law is corrupt, and that means then we're going to have to stick with the Scottish Court judge's ruling, and we have a lawful duty to act, civil disobedience, a national days of strike. We are literally going to have to do an Iceland to get this mob out of power. That's what we're going to need to do. And yes, an interim government that will have to be comprised of all equal MP party members until we have a general election and we get this mess sorted out. And then there are going to need to be criminal charges brought against the people that have orchestrated this and plotted and schemed, because we are talking about a conspiracy. This is not a theory, this is a fact. So that's where we're at, people. So, you know, I know it's been quite a long video, nearly an hour, but very important information, very, very important times, very serious times. And it's time everybody wakes up now, because I tell you, you fail to act now, that you are in for a very rude awakening. Ignorance is bliss until the rude awakening. Well, the cloven hoof of fascism is at our door, and it is time for us now to slam that door shut. And as I say, we'll wait for this Supreme Court judgment now coming on Tuesday, and if they fail now to stand with the Supreme Court of Scotland, then I'm sorry, you're going to have, this is it, revolt. Revolt against a revolting government, because the government has revolted against the people, our rights, our parliament, the law and the EU, and they are conspiring with foreign powers in order to wreak havoc on our nation and terrorise the British people and even the people of Europe. So there you go, people. Again, thank you for taking time to listen. Please share the information. I will leave the links, and you know, I'm not asking to share this video. I know people find me annoying and my videos are too long and blah 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 blah, but I'm just sharing this to get it out there, that 1 or 2 people of significance may pick it up and share the information and just get it out there, because it is time. We are literally on the brink now of, yeah, doing an Iceland, that if that's what it is going to take. I mean, hopefully the Queen will step forward and herself sack Boris Johnson. You know, that may be what is needed. And I think it is a terrible thing. She's an elderly lady, she's in her 80s, that this amount of responsibility now suddenly lands on her plate. So I do hope that the Supreme Court spares the Queen of even having to think about any such thing. Or at least that they would give her the support to do it. So, what can I say? Love and strength to everybody.